Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us whenever and wherever you are. My name is Zachary Hill, and I'm the Chief of Staff here at Tomorrow's Talent, where we strive every day to be the bridge for students and young adults from their education to the real world of work. Welcome to The Bridge to Tomorrow's Talent, a podcast where we talk about the state of the workforce, the future of work-based learning, how to best launch into new careers, and what makes the real world of work tick. Today, we've got something a little bit different for you. We're joined by two special guests, President and CEO of Tomorrow's Talent, Ginger Ontiveros, and Dr. Dale Marsden, former superintendent of San Bernardino City Unified Schools and the founder and chief visionary for us here at Tomorrow's Talent. How are you both doing today?
Great, Zach. Thanks so much for having me here today. I suppose I didn't need to wave because I'm, the only one that looks like Ginger. So
Yeah, it's always good to be with you, Zach, and it's a pleasure to talk with you and our listening audience about this.
Great. So glad we found time to make this happen today. I'm excited to let folks know what we do here. So I'm
agreed.
sure a lot of our audience already knows a bit about what Tomorrow's Talent does from previous episodes or from some of our other material. But if there was one thing you could tell everybody watching about the company, what would you want them to know? And maybe Dale can go first.
Yeah, I mean it's said in your background, we're the bridge to tomorrow's talent. What we mean by that is, superintendent in San Bernardino City, one of our nation's large urban school districts, very diverse population, 92% of kids traditionally marginalized, 90%. Poverty is classified by free and reduced lunch. We worked hard to get our kids to graduate high school, and we grew that graduation rate to a very high level from 66.8% to 93.6%, passing, local, state, county, national averages. Really grateful for the work that we did with the team. But what I've observed in my 30 years in public ed is once our kids, we shake their hands on the day of graduation, that stage, and we wish them well. We don't really know where they go. We don't pay attention to what they do. No system owns our students or their success once they leave high school, community college, or the university. So our real effort and our aim is to bridge our young people, our talent of tomorrow's talent, to the future world of work. But do it while they're in school. Most of the developed world has your first world countries, if you will, have students when they're age 16, activated in the real world. And we believe that this is a key to student engagement. And heck, even the staff engagement, when their students are engaged, their engagement goes up, and it really works for everybody involved. So we're just, that's what we're after. We're after getting kids early and often connections to the real world of work, touching those internships, building relationships, discovering, what it is they love doing, what they don't love doing, and make these decisions before they launch into a college. Perhaps maybe they want to go career to college versus college to career. So those are things that we look at and work with. K-12 districts largely, some community colleges and universities are also looking into preparing their students for success in life after school. But this is what we do, and we're so grateful to bridge this divide between our education system and the real world of work.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Dale. Yeah, I know, really trying to build those bridges for everybody. And Ginger, if you could tell folks one thing to know about Tomorrow's Talent, what would it be?
What I recognize or what I see really is that there are two very different cultures at play here. You have the culture of education and then you have the culture of work. And so we're very much in being that bridge, the interpreter or the translator or the Sherpa that really helps the student navigate that gap in between. But we don't only do that for the student, we do it for the systems themselves. So schools are very busy. They have a lot of demands that are placed on them. And I can tell you, I have never met a teacher that doesn't have a heart that says they want their students to succeed in the real world of work. I've never met a school administrator who doesn't care about the individual students trying to navigate that transition. Likewise, I haven't met a business person who doesn't recognize that next generation is their future workforce and they need them to be ready. But neither one of them on the two sides of that bridge really at scale have the capacity to understand the other culture the way that's necessary to make that transition easier and more successful for both of them and their students. So that's what we do. Like, we come in and we are the filler of that gap. We bring expertise, we bring capacity, we bring passion, right? And a real commitment to helping them succeed in navigating this sort of no man's land in the middle, right?
And
So
Zach, Ginger brings up a great point, and this
yeah.
is really how Tomorrow's Talent was born. As I was thinking about the idea, and the name comes up on a, kitchen napkin. It's nice to have a name, but the work that we were doing, I was wondering to myself, is this the right kind of thing to focus on? And then I came across the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's report in 2020 called "The Future of Talent Finance."
Mm.
And when I read that, and I know I've talked about this before, but it's worth repeating. When I read that, they said the future of talent finance must include three distinct entities: education as an entity, business as an entity, and intermediaries as an entity that help navigate that airspace between our education systems and our workforce. And that is the future of talent finance, and we've got to pay attention to that at every level, from a policy level to an employment level. So that's what we do. So Ginger, you're right on. That's what this work's about.
one of the
Great.
things, Dale, also, I'm sorry, that I really appreciate is your vision for and our commitment to helping the student navigate all the way from the classroom to the successful career.
Yeah.
You talked about it when you first started sharing that nobody owns their success, right? Well, when we work with a student at any level, when we work with an employee that's coming into the workplace at any level, we own their success all the way to that thriving space in the career they love. So yeah, that's a little bit about who we are and why we do what we do. So
Yeah, no, it seems really, really needed, especially in today's world of rapidly changing expectations and a job market that seems to be constantly under assault by automation and AI and all kinds of other things that are going to make jobs
Okay.
different to get into, right? Maybe not harder, but different. And I think that's really needed in society at large. But then I want to ask a little bit about what's your personal why for being here? I mean, I know you both had careers before this, right? Dale, you were superintendent, and Ginger, you worked for the school district and did some private business before that. But why is it that you're so driven to solve this specific problem that we're facing today?
Yeah, I think for me, it's you pay it forward. I know when I was a kid raised by a single mom, my brother and I had all kinds of troubles. Had gotten to some real challenges, and that was tough. My mom did the best she could. It's not easy being a single mother. I have great respect for single mothers, especially in the era where my mother grew up. If you were sick as a woman, you got fired. If you had challenges as a woman, you were fired, and that's just a really hard place to be in and raise two little kids through that. And so in my early years, when I had some real challenges and I'd run away from home, I'd run to my elementary school that was right next to my apartment complex. And it was those teachers that encouraged me and, talked to me and got me back on the right track. And, later down the road in high school, I got involved in an altercation, and it was a police officer, Officer Gary Day, took me on a ride along, and he said, he had me over his house, for dinner. He probably couldn't do that today, but he and his wife and later took me on a ride along and basically said, look, you need to go in the service and get your head screwed on straight. And that was my career advice was that. And I did it. I went in, wanting to be a police officer and thought that's what I might do for a living. Later thought I might be a pilot, bounced around, and got involved in youth ministry. And then I became a teacher. And, one thing led to the next that I found, an opportunity to lead. But I bounced around and found what I needed, and I often tell adults, don't take for granted how one small conversation with a young person can go a long way. And
Yeah.
here we are, fast forward, how many years later, and the data is telling us exactly that. The data is profound around one adult interaction experience and the power that has for a student. We call that at Morristown an internship. But there's data now that backs this up, that says this is the way of the future. of not just talent finance, but the way of the future for us to resolve really what I believe is the biggest crisis in public ed in America, that we have a disengaged student body. I was disengaged when I was in high school. It hasn't changed much. It's gotten more difficult. And as technologies advance and opportunities become more slim, we must do something different. We have a moral imperative to do something different. So this is what compels me.
Great, great. Yeah, very, very compelling story. Yeah, absolutely. You had that experience where somebody gave you the advice you needed.
That's right.
Yeah. And Ginger, what's your why to be here and help these students?
Well, similarly, I do want to pay it forward, and I do care about the students we serve and the potential that they have, and so that is also a piece for me. I'm also very drawn to solving difficult problems. Like I really want to be in the space where we figure out how to take a solution to scale that is that's closing this gap, because as Dale said, this gap is getting bigger, and that threatens not only the future of a whole generation, but it threatens local economies, right? It threatens really just the ability that we have for people to thrive. Our nation is really struggling today with this sort of divergence of people who are successful and people who just can't figure out how to make the system work. And so to me, solving a difficult problem has always been something that just hooked me in. And I've spent most of my career working in this space of trying to build connections between education and the community, and done some very fun and exciting things. But this feels to me like a systemic solution. Really, how does an intermediary come in and build the relationships with students and the relationships with employers, so that that navigation can happen at scale in a successful way? So for me, the problem itself is one I want to tackle, but it also strikes to my heart of wanting to make sure that the next generation has the opportunities that I had, that they're able to find success the way I was able to find success. And echoing what Dale said, the social capital connections are more challenging to create in a digital world, which you think that social media and the internet connects us, and it does on some level, but it also isolates us and makes that transition more difficult. So
Yeah.
I guess that's my why.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Zach,
Go ahead, Dale.
Ginger saying reminded me, and this is just to give an example of how um, profound it is that we don't take this lightly and take this to a macro and a global scale, right? So a lot of folks may not know, but national, international, world intelligence agencies collect data on youth under and unemployment to determine where next areas of civil unrest will occur. And we're seeing this civil unrest begin to unveil in parts of America. And in school districts are now being challenged to try to mitigate a lot of these real challenges with students being engaged. There's a lot of mental health challenges that are very real for students. But, I argue that if you get a student engaged in rigorous, relevant work at a young age, and they're doing things that make sense, and they're applying their learning, and they have purpose, they have meaning, they have a value. Those things start to make the other things smaller in their lives. When they have hope, they can see beyond their present circumstances. And I don't speak to this theoretically. I speak to it with, living it as a young kid, growing up in a, household where we didn't have a lot. And these were things that you could look forward to that would give you hope. Without that hope, you just start, doing dumb stuff. And so I think there's a lot here to unpack. I know we have just a short time to unpack it, but I wanted to make that mention that this is a global scale kind of issue that I think we have the ability in America to respond to in the right way.
Yeah, yeah, definitely right. This problem that we're trying to solve is bigger than just connecting individual students to individual experiences. We really are trying to tackle that societal problem that we're facing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. So if tomorrow's talent is all about building experiences and connections that bridge the education system to the real world of work, What are we doing? What's being done to prepare these students to be successful once they get their shot, once they're out there in the world?
Well, I think a number of things, right? So tomorrow's talent, or we are definitely actively trying to educate employers about their need to invest in that workforce pipeline as a solution. And at the same time, actively educating young people about what it takes to get a job, keep a job, advance in a job. A lot of that brings us to this space of understanding the difference in generations. So we dig into that and how that is impacting the success of young people when they get into a workforce where there are now 5 generations of employees, soon to be 6, maybe even verging on that, actually active in the workplace. It makes a difference in how we interact with each other, and that speaks to the education that we're providing to both sides. How do you work together in a way that is going to carry us forward and help us thrive? So we do that outreach. We also do the roll up your sleeves and figure out the design of an internship that's effective for both the students learning, but also productive for the employer, so that the investment that they're making actually provides a return both in the short term and then in the long term for their success.
So
So
interns aren't just sweeping floors.
they're not just sweeping floors, they're providing meaningful contributions in the area of their study. I will say that doesn't mean they don't sweep a floor, like, because even the CEO sweeps a floor sometimes, right? So,
Right.
so there's just good lessons for us to teach young people about what it means to work, and then also the employer about what really the benefits of pipeline development can be for their bottom line. So,
Yeah, definitely. And sorry, Dale, thought you were going to say something. So then, when I was a teacher, I listened to a lot of podcasts. I went to a lot of trainings, right? I sat through a lot of seminars, and I was always looking for something that I could take back to my classroom right away, something I could start doing with my students, on Monday when I got back to school. What can our partners inside the education system do today to help prepare their students to not only get, but keep these high wage, high demand careers?
Well, I think a lot of them are, especially the more advanced school districts that are paying attention to, success in life after high school. A lot of our employers think all the trades went away. I got to tell you, they've been reinvigorated at many of our schools, especially across California. And there's some pathways that exist in the state that are just second to none worldwide, for sure. So I think we're doing a lot more now to prepare students for the real world than we ever were. But the challenge school districts face is they just don't have enough capacity to do all this work alone, engaging employers, training employers of how do you build this talent pipeline. And then you talk about liability challenges that emerge and exist. And so, that becomes a barrier for a lot of employers. I'm not going to hire a kid that's 16 to come as an intern in my office. I just can't afford that. I can't do that. So, this ability to have, not just an intermediary, but have people that are, working hand in hand to make this effort fruitful across the state. It starts in the policy making, all the way to working with employers and education, and then just doing the work. I think so for our school district leaders, and their takeaway is don't try to do this work alone. You've got to reach out to an intermediary. You've got to have someone that can walk this walk with you, and be those arms and hands, because it's a more than a full-time job to be a classroom teacher or a district or school leader. These are tough jobs today, more difficult than ever in the history of U.S. public education, and so we've really got to walk away with that in our mindset.
Yeah, yeah.
I,
Ginger?
I definitely think that teachers need to welcome employers into their classroom, especially those that are working in the pathway space. But I would say, there isn't a subject that wouldn't have the value of an employer voice in it, especially if our goal really is the successful career for the graduates from our systems, right? So I think that welcoming the employer in is good. But I also believe that teachers need to understand that employers have a whole different frame in how they approach their day and the priorities of their work. And a lot of times the mismatch happens because teachers just sort of give a blank canvas to an employer and say, hey, come in and do something with us to make it relevant and meaningful. But the employer doesn't have the time to really think about that. So
Mm.
that's where an intermediary like us comes in, because we know enough, having worked in and been deeply engaged in the education system, to understand what will work in a classroom and how we can augment what the teacher's already doing, but to translate that into something that the employer doesn't have to become an educator to understand how to implement. So I think, yes, absolutely, embracing what an intermediary can do for you is very helpful, because it does accelerate the things that educators want to do in their classrooms, while not expecting the employer to understand it all. And I will tell you also, I've been in the school districts space where employers do spend the time trying to figure out what it is that they want to give to a school. And I have found that that sometimes is equally hard for a school district to absorb, or a classroom to accommodate, because all the good intention that was put into that didn't necessarily take into account the realities of what's happening in a school. So even employers could benefit from having an intermediary with education expertise helping them design and connect to schools and plug in ways that make a difference. So
Yeah, no, great. And then on the flip side of that, right, if I'm a student watching this or listening to this, what are some steps that I can take today that can help me set myself up for future successes, right? What kind of things can I take advantage of that are out there to really put myself in a good position?
I have so much to say about this, right? I know recently we talked to a group of students, and I think they were eighth grade students. So I'm going to give them a little bit of a pass, but I think that it's not completely untrue for other ages as well. And this group of eighth grade students, when we asked them what their parents did for a living, they
Mm,
didn't know. They couldn't describe it. And so I would say, get curious first, right? Ask questions of the adults in your life about what they do, why they love it. Do as much career exploration as you possibly can before you leave the K-12 system, and leave the K-12 system with a plan to your first waypoint. Like, and I want them to not think about their career like it's a life sentence. It is the education they need to get to the first job they love. And and do that career exploration where it's free in high school. There's such robust pathways that are happening there. Take advantage of those. Learn about careers as much as you can. Talk to people who are working when you're out in the community, and just get to know careers, because when you get in college you start paying for that experience. And even
mm,
if you're on a Pell Grant or some other kind of aid or a scholarship, there's only so much support that's coming to you through that. It's finite. It's not going to stay with you forever for all of the exploration you could possibly do when somebody else is paying for it, because they already paid for it when you were not in school, right? So the longer you spend in college, the more likely it is that you will drop out, the more debt you might get, right? So I say to have a plan before you get to college that takes you to that first career, or consider, whether you're going to career first and then going back to college, but definitely have a plan to that first waypoint, and realize it's not a life sentence. You can learn and change and evolve your career over your life. So I guess that was probably a lot more than one piece of advice, but
no, great, great. I think students need all the advice we can give them right now, right? It's a tough workforce out there. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
and
Dale.
I'd add to that something I learned from Ernesto Ceroli. He gave a talk at a workforce board development event. Had dinner with him, and then later talked to him privately on the phone. He did a TED talk some time ago titled "Want to Help Someone Shut Up and Listen," and it went viral. So this is what got him on the stage, in multiple places. But as I was talking with him privately, he said if he was working with an individual student, he would ask them, what do you love doing?
Mm,
And he gave the example of a kid, if he loves painting, He just wants to paint. He said, well, call a painter in your city and say, hey, I'm thinking about I want to be a painter, and could I work with you? And he said, nobody does. Every adult wants to listen to a kid, and they want to help him out, and he's right. And so I think that if we listen to our kids and say, what is it you love doing? And if they don't know what they love doing, we have assessments. We have a great partner in youth science who has the, former inventors of WebMD created youth science, this great assessment for kids to look at their interests, talents, and aptitudes, things they might love doing or be good at. So if we can, help guide students to clearly define what it is they love doing and start getting them engaged in experiences early and often, I think it goes a long way. And the second part of this goes back to what Ginger mentioned around college. There's a report just came out early last year by Burning Glass Institute and Strada Education Foundation, and they found in their report that college is no longer a guarantee of labor market success, and their data is profound. And I mean, we got to yell this from the top of the mountain. Profound for educators, right? And K-12 education systems exist to prepare students for the holy grail of public ed, which is the bachelor's degree. And they did a study on kids that went off for their bachelor's degree, and these are terminal bachelor's degrees. So don't mix them up with kids that are going on for, being a medical doctor or dentist or, something that requires a master's or doctoral degree. These are terminal bachelor's degree data. And here's some things that they found. It's important for me to say them out loud.
Yeah.
Only half of students who graduate from college get a college level job within 1 year of college. These are the jobs, again, that require a 4-year degree. And college grads face an increasing degree of risk because they're losing hundreds of thousands, $800,000 a year over a lifetime of earnings if they don't get that college level job out of
Wow.
college. This report looked at tens of millions of graduates, and they focused again on these terminal degrees. 52% of the grads were underemployed a year after college. 52%. So kids going to college, over half are underemployed for 1 year, and a decade later, 45% of them remained underemployed
Wow.
up to a decade later. This is tragic. This is
Mhm.
tragic. So that first job they point out after graduation is critical. If you get a college paying job within 1 year after college, you're nearly 80% of those remain in a college paying or above job. So the difference is stark. And underemployment, they said, was sticky. 73% of those who start out underemployed remain so 10 years after completing college. I mean, think about that for a minute. That's a big number of
Yeah.
our kids. And then you think about the heavy financial cost. Again, recent graduates that have a college job, 88%, were more employed than their high school graduating counterparts, whereas underemployed graduates were just 25% more employed than their high school counterparts. And then again, they highlight that underemployment varies by college degree, which makes sense. And STEM is no longer a silver bullet. They did say tech jobs you tend to land a little bit easier in, although recently with the advent of AI, I'd say that number's dwindling. Life sciences, higher underemployment in those places. But here's the piece that comes back to what we're working to achieve with Tomorrow's Talent. They said that college level employment rates are higher for those who complete an internship. They said the odds of underemployment for graduates with one internship are 48.5% lower than those with no internship. So if we can get kids one internship, and I would say the earlier the better, early and often, if you get a kid an internship, you double their chances of success in life after high school, life after college. And again, this report, I think, should be mentioned everywhere with education leaders. College is no longer a guarantee of labor market success. And so we've got to wire ourselves differently and ensure our students have these. This should be required, experience required in high school and community colleges and colleges.
I have one
Yeah.
other piece to add to this question, Zach, about the advice that we want to give to young people, right? And
Right.
that is that their networks matter.
Mm.
So, the relationships that they build in school with their peers, the relationships that they build with their intern supervisors, the relationships they build with their teachers, the relationships they build with adults in their lives as they grow up are vitally important to their success. Networking matters. So I would just add to all of that the network you have can open doors for you, will open doors for you. And so just never underestimate the power of that relationship building that you do throughout your life. Stay in touch with your college classmates, stay in touch with your high school classmates. They end up in places that matter, and because they know you, they're able to open doors and make opportunities happen for you as well. So I wanted to add that. See, we have lots of advice
Yeah, I was just
for
reading
young
from
people.
Warren Buffett. He's like, hang around with the 10% of people you'd invest in. When you see them in college, you think they're going to be successful, hang around with them. I had a best friend in high school, Bob Wallstein. And, early on in his high school kind of experience, he was, hanging out with the wrong crowd, doing a few drugs here and there, that kind of thing. And so I separated, went off on my way. And we came back together full circle, about a year after high school. And he was all buff and built out and worked out. And I said, Bob, what happened to you? He said, I just decided to get into, bodybuilding and weightlifting. And I decided to hang around some of the best in bodybuilding. At the time, he was hanging around people that were hanging around with Arnold Schwarzenegger and others that were, well-known bodybuilders. He ended up winning Mr. California naturally, meaning no drugs, nothing added. And he won that. He's quite a guy to accomplish this, right? And I think about that for our young people. These internships get you the opportunity to hang out with people that are achieving things that you personally want to achieve. And that's what builds the social capital. And on the flip side, what we found, we didn't look for this, but what we found was that employers who are engaging with students in internships, employee engagement goes up. And Gallup has put so much data out on this of the cost of employee disengagement. And so if we can help, create an ecosystem of engagement, I think we're after something that really is a game changer for public ed in America.
Yeah, and I want to dig in on a little bit more on something you said earlier about college and college attainment and how it's not the one ticket that you need to get forward anymore. I was definitely part of that generation that was told,
Yeah.
college is it. You go to college, you're definitely going to land in a good job, no doubt about it. And so I went to college myself, took me a little bit of extra time to get through it, and I'm not anymore doing the job that I got my credential for, right? I became a classroom teacher. I was teaching, I was using my credential, and now I'm not using that anymore, right? I'm still using a lot of what I learned in college, but
Sure.
not necessarily the degree that I went out for.
Right.
What other traditional wisdom or traditional career paths have become less accurate over the years, and how should students and employers adapt to the new reality?
Yeah, I think, given what I said earlier around, college no longer being a determinant of labor market success, we have to rethink our work around college. So the question becomes, do you go from, high school to a career and then to college, or do you go from high school to college? And a lot of this depends on what's your end goal, right? And what's your level of interest and engagement, right? A lot of kids will go to college because they think it's what they got to do, and then they spend 4, 5, 6, 7 years working on a bachelor's degree, some on an associate's degree, and so we've really got to help pinpoint this, because what happens then is you emerge with a load of college debt and you're teed up to be underemployed. What a tragedy. And then you think about the level of college debt. If you're a black male and you emerge with college debt, you're likely to have 20% more than your white counterparts. And so, for those that are traditionally marginalized, trying to dig out of generational poverty, and you're thinking college is going to be the game changer for you, you need to think again. Because you need to not only go to college, but you need to have an internship lined up, and I would say more than one. If I was a black male and giving advice to a black male today, I'd say, one, go at your college with the ability to do no to achieve with no debt, or start working and pay your way through college, or work with an employer that will pay for your college for you. Many employers are doing this. They're paying for students' college, doing tuition reimbursement. We have a great story, we've shared it before, of a young man from an automotive blue collar job who got into the water industry, David Rojas, and he ends up, going from high school to career, and this career, this employer will pay college tuition reimbursement for him to, get his college degree when he wants to promote, which he's entertaining now. So I think there's a lot more opportunity for students that exist if you're thoughtful about crafting your path. But a lot of times what they're getting is college advice and college planning, but not career planning that's coupled with that in a very real and current day kind of effort. It needs to be real time.
Right. Got to have that goal in mind when you're thinking about college, right? It's not college for college's sake,
Yeah.
but college for preparing you for that career, getting towards your plans for the future.
And I'll put a footnote there, and that's this. Ginger mentioned before about the power of networking. Most of your, I think it was Jeffrey Canada when he was asked, he led the Harlem Zone Children's Project. He was asked by a parent, should my kid go to college? Should all kids go to college? And Jeffrey Canada said, when in doubt, do what rich people's kids do. Rich people's kids go to colleges, but they don't just go to colleges. They go to prestigious colleges. Why? Because what Ginger said, there's networks of other prestigious people that they start building these relationships with. So there is value in college. Don't get me wrong. This is about college and career. You've got to go into it with your eyes wide open, and you got to go into it with a bigger understanding, because if you go about it the wrong way, you could set yourself back financially, like some are. Again, 800,000, almost $1 million lost in lifetime earnings if you get this wrong. You want to get out of generational wealth. You want to live well and prosper. You've got to give a thoughtful plan to your college or career pathway.
Absolutely. Absolutely important. Ginger, anything to add before we move on?
I definitely think that there is value to everything that Dale said there about having a goal and making sure you're working toward it and building the networks, and that college may not be the path. There are many paths to get to success. I think you have to be a lifelong learner. I think you should expect that. So I'm not going to necessarily hone in on that there's traditional advice, but maybe that there's advice that's being given that students don't always accept, or don't always listen to, or don't always embrace. And that is to practice those soft skills in school. When your teacher says you have a deadline for work to be accomplished, meet the deadline, because that is a very real thing that you need to be able to do in the job market. And if you practice not meeting the deadline because there's going to be extra credit, or you're going to get a little pass and get extra time, then you will practice your way into habits that become detrimental to your advancement in a career. When your school says you need to be there on time, same thing. Practice getting there on time, because that is a skill that you're going to need to have. So I would say it's not so much that it's traditional advice that we should rethink. It's more like it's traditional advice that you really should lean into, that I don't think a lot of students always do every day. And by the way, there's a million teachers right now saying, thank you for saying that.
Oh, yeah. I
But
mean, I know I was given that advice growing up, right? They said your school is your job, right? School is your job. And that's what I was going there to do every day. That was my job, to go and learn. And so we got to lean in and treat it like a job, right? Meet those deadlines, always be present, all those kinds of things that matter for anything you're going to do in life, whether it's a sport or a job or education. You got to show up, you got to do what's expected. Yeah, definitely.
yep, 100%.
So, for both of you, looking at the work that's out there and the changing expectations for entry-level workers, do you think there's enough pathways for early professionals to build the experience they need? And what do you think those pathways look like? We've talked a lot about career to college or college to career and internships. And I mean, is there one path or many? What's your view on that for students today?
Well, I do think there are many pathways. So,
Many paths.
some will go to college, some will go to a trade school, some will go to the military, some will go directly to work. So I think there are many paths to get there. But I do think that there's a major disruption that's happening right now as people figure out what AI, the power of AI is in the workplace. And that is definitely putting up new barriers to access. And there are people who wisely say that we're not losing jobs for everybody, but the jobs are changing into those that know how to use AI effectively. So I definitely think there's some truth to that. But while that pendulum is swinging in that direction, it's definitely disrupting the entry path into the workplace. All the more reason to be working with somebody, with an intermediary who is out there advocating for young people and advocating for opportunities and doors to be open with employers, so that employers are not completely discounting that entry level job that they now think AI can do for them. So I definitely believe that there's a need for more advocates asking for opportunities and opening doors for young people, so that they're not part of those that are 10 years out of college without, having broken into that college level career that they studied for. So yeah, that's where I think we're at.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
I think, my kind of final thought on this is when we create this ecosystem we've been talking about, you then have, real-time interactions between education and the workspace. So any of the challenges that students might face in the future become challenges they're tackling now. What's the challenge in the workforce, in the workplace now, and how do we, in that live interaction, in the current moment between education and the real world, how do we resolve that? If you keep the traditional structure, I mean, you think about it, you could go K-12, then go on to college, and then go to the university beyond that, get your PhD, having never stepped foot in the real world of work. Oh, and by the way, I think I'll be a professor. So, it gets you in this spiral of losing connectedness in this ecosystem to the real world. And so, taking ideation to market in a traditional school setting, it takes you at least a couple, 2 to 4 years to take a new idea to get it into curriculum. And especially at the higher you go up in education, the longer that takes. K-12, you could probably do it pretty quick. You get to college, it's community college, maybe 2 years. High school, 4-year university, it's going to take 4 years to get it approved by all the faculty senates, and then it's outdated. And this is the problem we have. We're dealing with a dynamically changing environment, and for students to do that, we have to have a responsive ecosystem, responsive to the workforce needs, and education reacts to that and does what's necessary and adapts and has to be adaptable in this kind of environment, or we're just going to continue trying to manage and deal with our failures. There's no reason we can't outperform every nation in the world with what we can do if just given students a chance. I was reminded the other day, I saw some crazy little Facebook post on you get these funny pictures or whatever, and this one guy posted something in his class. He was a high school history teacher. He said, on day one of my high school history class, our professor got up and said, "You are 15 or 16 years old. 200 years ago, people your age were married, planted crops, had children, and built a cabin by winter. You can do your homework." He goes on and just talks about, the bar that we've set is historically low, and he's right. He's right that we expect so little of our adolescents, and they're capable of so much more richly and diversely. They're very smart people out there, young people, and I think we've got to give them an opportunity to fly, and I think we can do better than we're doing.
Great, great, great spot to stop. Thank you so much for joining us both today and sharing your thoughts. I
Always a
know that
pleasure.
I love these conversations that we can have, and I just love digging into this topic and really trying to solve the problem that we're all facing. A reminder for everybody watching or listening along, if you'd like to stay a part of this conversation, please, in the description of this episode, you'll find a link for our churn calculator. It's a great tool you can use if you're a business leader or an employer to play with some numbers and see what the true cost of churn is at your organization for any position. Be sure to tweak all the variables and really make sure that it's a representation of what you do. And if that gets you thinking about a way to reduce churn, please give us a call. And thank you all so much for everybody else just joining to watch along and listen with us. We appreciate you being here. If you're watching on YouTube, please take a moment to leave a comment about what you thought about the conversation and keep it going with everybody down there. And take a moment to click that like button, right? Click the subscribe button if you're just listening to us on a podcast, and make sure that you get alerted when more episodes of the podcast come out. We'll definitely see you guys next time on the Bridge to Tomorrow's Talent. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.